Welcome to Facebook Live, episode 7. I can't remember what I called it. The truth about fat and why we've all been hoodwinked. So today I'm going to talk about fat. It's a topic that I'm particularly interested in and passionate about for a couple of reasons. One, because I see firsthand the changes that go on in all parts of all areas of a person's health when they go from a low-fat diet to a diet that's high in healthy fats. Hey, Richard, welcome. Hey, AJ, welcome, guys. All about fats today. Hey, Ricky. I see firsthand the changes that happen when people go from eating low-fat to a diet with adequate amounts of fat in it. And also because I eat a lot of fat and I love it. Like I walk around eating tubs of cream with berries and stuff, and people look at it like it's really weird, but it's actually an incredibly nutrient dense food. But I qualify that cream. I don't just eat like cream, pasteurized cream from the shelf. I eat raw, unpasteurized cream. And I'll talk at the end a bit about how to qualify fats. So the first thing is that fat is, so the second part of my title is how we've all been hoodwinked, because we've been hoodwinked by the powers that be to think that fat is bad for us and to think that it causes heart disease and raised cholesterol and diabetes and all of these diseases, which is false information. Hey, Ev, how you doing? So that's known as the Lipid Hypothesis. The Lipid Hypothesis was created by a guy called Ansel Keys in the 1950s, and he was a physiologist. The Lipid Hypothesis goes something like this: saturated fat in the diet leads to raised cholesterol in the bloodstream, which leads to heart disease and atherosclerosis and arteriosclerosis and stuff like that, which is completely false. He did what was known as the Seven Nations study, where he got data from 7 different countries, like the US, that had extremely high levels of saturated fat, and he showed that people in the US have very high rates of heart disease, and then countries like Japan had very low levels of fat in the diet, had very low rates of heart disease. It came out later that he actually had data from 22 different countries, and he just cherry-picked the data that fitted his hypothesis. He left out countries like France and Switzerland that ate really high amounts of saturated fat and had very low rates of heart disease, and he left out other countries that had very low levels of fat in their diet and very high amounts of heart disease. So the lipid hypothesis has gone on since the 1950s, and since then, governments like the Australia and the US government have pushed through the medical industry, through nutritionists and doctors, and through the food companies, that we should all be eating low fat, right? And most people, until recently, most people would have thought that fat is bad and that we should be avoiding fat at all costs. There's been a lot of fraudulent studies done as well. And when I say that, not necessarily fraudulent, but just bad science. Like they'll clump saturated fat and trans fat together and say, this study is looking at whether saturated fat and trans fat will lead to increased levels of cholesterol in the blood and heart disease. And basically, trans fat will do those things, but then saturated fat takes the rap. So saturated fat is actually a very healthy fat. Saturated fat, fat is a whole huge class of nutrients. Protein, carbohydrate, and fat are known as the macronutrients because we can convert them to energy in the bloodstream. All the other nutrients like vitamin C and vitamin D and minerals and stuff are nutrients, but we can't use them as energy. So the macronutrients can be converted to energy. So fat is this whole class of nutrients, and there are 3 families of fats that we can consume: saturated fat, monounsaturated fat, and polyunsaturated fat. Yeah, they can. I think science can answer questions very specifically, but it depends on the questions that are asked to start with. And it depends on how the studies are put together. And a lot of the time, when you can look at how the studies have been done and the wording and stuff, they can tend to veer the conclusions off in another direction. Hey, Kate, hey, Nilesh. G'day, Gerardo. Welcome, guys. So there's saturated fats, monounsaturated, and polyunsaturated fats. So saturated fats are things that are solid at room temperature generally, like butter, ghee, coconut oil. They're all saturated fat. They're saturated because they have these long carbon chains where every molecule is saturated with two hydrogen molecules, saturated being very stable. Monounsaturated means somewhere along that chain there is a double bond, which means two of those carbons are missing a hydrogen molecule each, and that double bond is less stable. So that's like olive oil. And then you have polyunsaturated oils that have multiple double bonds, multiple unsaturated, unstable bonds. So because of that, saturated fats are very stable, meaning they're solid at room temperature, and they can be cooked at a very high temperature. They'll last to about 150 degrees before they oxidize, whereas monounsaturated like olive oil will last to about 98 degrees. And then the polyunsaturated fats, which are all the vegetable oils, which we are told to eat the most of, things like canola oil, will oxidize at about 45 degrees, which, by the way, is lower than the temperature that they are taken to during production. So by the time you get canola oil or sunflower oil or any of the healthy oils that the Heart Foundation tells us to eat, they're actually, by the time they're in the bottle, they're already oxidized and rancid. And I want you to think about this. If you get coconut oil, you can try this, coconut oil or good quality ghee or even good quality lard or tallow, and rub it on your skin. It will absorb in. Your skin will suck it up and use it. It's beneficial for your cells. If you get those crappy polyunsaturated oils and rub it on your skin, it sticks, it stays on there like engine oil. And the same thing happens in your gut when you eat those foods, which is why when you eat it at a restaurant that's been using cheap oils, that you'll be burping and flatulent and bloated and stuff for such a long time, because it just sits in your gut. It can't be absorbed properly. So there's those three fats: saturated, mono, poly. Interesting. I was in Woolworths the other day, and I was looking. They've got these health ratings, and they give everything, well, not everything, but a lot of the foods, they give it a health rating. It's out of 5 stars. And extra virgin coconut oil or organic coconut oil, which is probably one of the healthiest fats you can get and one of the most beneficial fats you can get, has a 0.5 star health rating. Whereas canola oil, which is one of the worst fats you can have, has a 3-star health rating. So it's easy to see how we've been so manipulated into eating fats that aren't good for us. And interestingly, since the 50s, when Ansel Keys created the Lipid Hypothesis and got the US and the Australian governments on board, the rates of the very diseases that was meant to stop have actually gone up. We haven't seen a decline in heart disease and diabetes and all those degenerative diseases. We've seen an increase in them since these dietary changes have been recommended. And it's not because people don't follow the directions, because people do follow the directions. Most of the time when I get people in here talking about diet, most people think they're eating a good diet. And not many people will come in and say, "Oh no, my diet's shit. I don't give a shit. I just eat McDonald's all day." Most people on this call will attest that you eat the diet that you think is healthy for you in general. It's okay to eat things that aren't best for you some of the time, but most of the time people try and do what's right. So those polyunsaturated oils tend to be unstable and rancid by the time we've even got them out of the bottle. Saturated fats which are solid at room temperature, which is butter, ghee, coconut oil, all the animal fats, are very stable even at high temperatures, so are therefore good for cooking. And monounsaturated fats like olive oil are very healthy and stable to 95 or 98 degrees and can be used at low temperature cooking or are best cold on salads and whatnot. So I'm going to say, oh yeah, and there's one more class of fats, which are trans fats, and trans fats are harmful fat. This is the one type of fat you should really stay away from, trans fats. Trans fats are man-made. They're hydrogenated polyunsaturated vegetable oils, and they were made in order to make polyunsaturated fats last longer and to make them solid at room temperature, like butter, which is why you have margarine, which is trans fat, which is solid at room temperature. So what is a good fat then, and how do you qualify a good fat? So a good fat, in my opinion, is any fat that is unchanged from the way nature presented it to us. So all natural fats are good. Fats from animals, so long as those animals are treated well. When you get a grass-fed, grass-finished cow that's been eating grass, which is the natural diet that cows are meant to eat for its whole life, that fat will generally be pretty healthy. Saturated fat from ruminant animals is very high in fat-soluble vitamins, which are incredibly important and very hard to get elsewhere, or impossible to get elsewhere. Actually, vitamin A, vitamin D, and vitamin K2 are the fat-soluble vitamins, and they are only found in animal fat. You cannot get those foods in plant foods. So, hey, Maddie, welcome. So in the green grass, there is vitamin K, and there are precursors to omega-3s. And when cattle or sheep or a ruminant animal eat those grasses, they eat kilos and kilos and kilos every day, and they condense those vitamins into a form that we can use, which are like the usable omega-3s like EPA and DHA, which are polyunsaturated fats, but which when stored in the saturated fat are very stable and safe for eating. And vitamin K is converted to vitamin K2. So vitamin K2, vitamin A, and vitamin D direct minerals where to go in the body, and we're pretty much ubiquitously deficient in those vitamins and in omega-3s because of the dietary advice we've been given, which is to stay away from animal fats, and because most of the animal fats we do eat come from grain-fed cattle, which is not a diet that cows are meant to eat. So a good fat is any fat that's still unchanged from the way nature presents it to us, and that hasn't been heated beyond those temperatures, which is about 45 for polyunsaturated, 98 for mono, and 150 for saturated fats. Harmful fats are trans fat, which are man-made fat, or any fat that's been raised above the temperature at which it oxidizes. So it's important to know as well that all traditional diets prior to agriculture and prior to even a couple of hundred years ago, all traditional diets had fat in their diet. Most native people who had very good health from what I read, and most people prior to 100 years ago had pretty generally good health. They didn't have any of the chronic diseases that we have nowadays. They died of infectious diseases and trauma and stuff like that, but not of chronic health problems. They would eat fat. They wouldn't go and cut fat off the meat and eat the lean meat. They wouldn't avoid, oil in a pan. Those cultures all ate fat, and they didn't think of it as fat. This is another big problem that we have nowadays, is that we've become so cerebral with our eating habits, and everything's about how many grams of carbohydrate and protein and fat you're having. Traditional cultures would eat food for what it was. They would understand about beef or about buffalo or about goanna or kangaroo and understand the energy that those animals and the plants gave them. They didn't think about all these calculations that we think about nowadays, which change all the time anyway. So ultimately, we need to reconnect with our bodies and start to listen to them rather than thinking too much about how much fat and how much carbohydrate and how much protein you're having. So I've gone on a little bit of a tangent here. I've got some little points on my thing here that I'm kind of following. Hi, Kate. Welcome. So yeah, it's only in modern times that we've kind of had the idea of low fat. You know, it's only a very modern thing. In fact, any kind of diet is a modern thing. In the past, people just ate what was available to them, and they'd eat the whole animal, and they'd eat whole foods, and that included ample amounts of fat and protein and usually carbohydrate as well. So the reason fat is important for us, there are a few reasons. One, there are two ways we can create energy in the body. One is known as glycolysis, and the other is beta oxidation. So glycolysis, remember I said that there are three macronutrients. Glycolysis uses carbohydrate and protein, and beta oxidation uses fat. Glycolysis has some downsides. One is that with glycolysis, your body will produce insulin in order to carry blood sugar from your blood and store it in cells. So when you eat carbohydrate and protein, there is an insulin response, and insulin draws that energy away to be stored, and it's stored in fat. When you eat fat, there is no insulin response. So your body isn't working overtime to store that energy as fat. The second thing is glycation. Glycation is a process of where sugars and protein will bind to each other, and they damage cell walls, and they create inflammation and stress, and they cause a whole bunch of health problems based on a product called advanced glycation end products. So when you're eating high amounts of protein and carbohydrate, you get these advanced glycation end products, which are known as AGEs, AGE, because they age things. They age your skin. They give you wrinkles. They'll cause your eyesight to deteriorate, blood vessels to stiffen and harden and whatnot. Whereas we don't get that when we eat fat. Eating trans fat has a whole bunch of other problems, and I might go there, but basically trans fat will take the place of fat, and your body thinks it's a saturated fat. Saturated fats are very important for the cell walls. Most of our cell membrane, not cell walls. Most of the cell membranes in our body are made of saturated fat, and they help the cell to communicate with other cells, and they stop it dissolving. They stop it breaking down in the liquid that they're suspended in all the time. So when we eat trans fats, which are those man-made fats, they take the place of saturated fat. Your body gets confused, but the trans fat it can't operate the same way that saturated fat does in the cell wall, so it leads to a whole bunch of problems as well. So it's funny how this fats, which have been villainized, are probably the one thing we can run on with very minimal health problems. So glycolysis, two pathways for creating energy. Glycolysis, which runs on protein and fat and comes with its own problems, and protein and carbohydrate, and beta oxidation, which runs on fat. So if you want to lose weight, if you want to burn body fat, the only way that fat is burnt is through beta oxidation. It can't be burnt through the glycolysis pathway. And just like a muscle or a neural pathway in your body, when you eat protein and carbohydrate all the time, you're strengthening that glycolysis pathway and not beta oxidation. When you eat a diet high in fat, particularly if you go into ketogenesis, which is where your body is creating ketones from fat in an environment that is lacking carbohydrate and protein, then you are strengthening that beta oxidation pathway. And then at times when you're hungry or when glycogen stores are low, your body now knows how to burn your body fat. So you need to eat fat to lose fat. As I mentioned, it has a very important role in creating the cell walls, cell membranes, and it's also sorry, hang on, I'm getting distracted again. Okay, so the other part of that lipid hypothesis is eating saturated fat in the diet increases cholesterol, which leads to heart disease and stuff. So cholesterol has a very important role in the cell wall, cell membrane as well. And it's the precursor to all of our hormones, all of our sex hormones and all of our stress hormones. So when you're stressed and your body needs to create cortisol, it's made from cholesterol. All our sex hormones are made from cholesterol as well. If you're stressed and you're using up all your body's cholesterol, you'll often have a deficiency in the sex hormones because the body will prioritize the stress hormones. So at times of stress, we need to be eating more fat and more cholesterol-rich foods. Cholesterol is also anti-inflammatory. Cholesterol has a very important role in the body as well with regard to reducing inflammation and helping damaged cells. So when there's cellular damage because of stress, usually your body will send cholesterol to those areas in order to help them heal. So cholesterol is something else that's been villainized that is actually very important and very healthy and anti-inflammatory, and we need more of it. It's also the precursor to those fat-soluble vitamins, particularly vitamin D, which is converted by sunlight. The cholesterol in our skin is converted by sunlight to vitamin D. When we eat grass-fed animals that are outside in sunlight, they have cholesterol in their fur that the sunlight will convert to vitamin D, and then they lick that off and it gets stored in their fat. So when we eat that animal fat, so long as it is from grass-fed, free-range, outdoor animals, then we benefit from those fat-soluble vitamins. And when animals have been kept in a feedlot and fed grains and haven't been in sunlight, they won't have that vitamin D. So cholesterol is very important for us and for the animals that we eat. It's also the precursor to coenzyme Q10, which is a very important heart nutrient and a powerful antioxidant. So again, these things that have been villainized are actually very important for health and longevity, and getting rid of them causes a lot of problems. So the next couple of things, if anyone has any questions, ask away. I know I kind of give a lot of information. I'm all over the place a little bit. Like I try and stay on topic, but there's just so much I want to say, and yeah, half an hour is not very long. But at the same time, I want to keep things kind of short and concise enough that people can absorb it and get something. So if I'm leaving stuff out, if anyone has questions, shoot, and I'll do my best to answer them. I'm just going to talk next about like healthy sources of fat and foods that people generally think are not healthy, and how to qualify them. So remember I said that a healthy fat is any natural fat that is unchanged from the way nature presented it to us, and it's from a healthy source, and that it hasn't been heated above above the temperature that it will oxidize. So the way to tell whether a fat is saturated or mono or poly is to see what it does in at room temperature versus in the fridge. So saturated fats will be solid at room temperature. They're things like butter, cream, ghee, lard, tallow. Mainly animal fats are mainly saturated, land animals anyway. Monounsaturated like olive oil will tend to be liquid at room temperature and will start to go solid or cloudy in the fridge. And then polyunsaturated fats like fish oils and vegetable oils will stay liquid even when you put them in the fridge. So things like cream, like I eat a lot of cream, but I source raw unpasteurized cream. So it hasn't been heated, it hasn't been pasteurized, which means all of those fat-soluble vitamins are intact. When you pasteurize cream, it'll harden the proteins. It kills a lot of the enzymes. It kills a lot of the fat-soluble vitamins in there, or it destroys them, I should say. It's still okay. It's still the fats themselves are still intact, but there are a lot of other beneficial things in that food that are destroyed with pasteurization. So cream is still okay in small amounts. If you get raw cream, I just eat it literally by the tub full. With some berries and stuff on it. It's beautiful and very nourishing, And the thing is, you only need to eat a little bit. Like, you have a couple of spoonfuls of cream with some berries for breakfast, then I'll forget to eat till 1 or 2 o'clock. It's so nourishing. You don't have the highs and lows associated with insulin that come from eating carbohydrate food. Yeah, Keish, coconut oil is another good one. And coconut oil has been villainized a little bit lately as well. I saw an article a while ago by someone saying that, coconut oil is tainted as this health food, when actually it's a saturated fat, so it's bad. Which is, again, based on the lipid hypothesis, which I don't believe is true, and on this crappy science. So I think coconut oil, again, if it's grown in a healthy environment, if it's not being heated, so the raw extra virgin ones are going to be best, then it's a very healthy fat with lots of medium chain fats, which are very easy to digest and are thermogenic, meaning they increase metabolism, will help you to lose weight. Ev, what's the best kind of brand to look out for with cream? So I don't know if I should be saying this on a Facebook Live. We're not meant to eat raw, unpasteurized dairy in New South Wales, but I do, and you can find it. And Ev, I'll tell you where to find it. Maybe message me. It's sold as a cosmetic product to get around labeling laws. But I've spoken to the farmer. I know that he is exceptionally passionate about caring for his cows, and he has whole paddocks full of different clovers and grasses and stuff for them to choose what to eat, so they can balance their own bodies, and it's very healthy cream. Otherwise, if you're just in a shop, I would look for just for an organic one. I don't know if Paris Creek, an organic or biodynamic brand is going to be the best. You know that the cows have been outdoors in the sunlight eating grass. Yeah, so that's what I'd look out for with cream. Important to know here, guys, especially for weight loss, you want to be careful eating a lot of fat and eating carbohydrate. Because if you're eating carbohydrate, you have the insulin, which is going to draw those calories into fat to be stored. So, and also fat is very calorie dense. So this is where people go wrong, is to just start eating all these loads of fat and not change anything else in your diet. You want to ideally drop the carbohydrate levels down, and I'm not saying to do that forever. I don't think anyone should be on a ketogenic diet forever. It definitely is a very powerful tool and has some very powerful health benefits, but we also need to have metabolic flexibility and need to be able to survive on carbohydrates at time. And I think there are benefits from plant foods that you don't get when you're always eating fat. But so good question, Ev. Yeah, Baramba is another brand. It's an organic one. I know I've got their yogurt and stuff. Paris Creek is good. I get their butter all the time. I make ghee from their butter. Ghee is another really good healthy source of fat that you can buy, or you can make from melting down butter and getting rid of the milk solids. So best sources of fat soluble, or of saturated fat: butter, ghee, tallow, lard, coconut oil. Olive oil is a great form of monounsaturated fat. As I said, don't use it for cooking, just put it on your salads. Be very careful with polyunsaturated. They are incredibly healthy, especially omega-3s when they're sourced right and they haven't been raised above 45 degrees. So usually some of the organic cold pressed brands will be in a dark opaque bottle and are kept in the fridge, and they claim to be under that temperature. It's very hard to grind seeds without creating friction and heat, so I would still be careful those oils. Krill oil is a good source of omega-3s, which are really important. There's always a bit of it's when you look at it, just how much heat is created to extract those oils. Polyunsaturated oils are really always going to be a bit of a danger zone. You do get adequate omega-3s if you're eating grass-fed beef and lamb. So grass-fed meat from herbivores has just as much omega-3 fats as does wild-caught salmon. So you don't really need to go out and get polyunsaturates from anywhere else. And if you're eating nuts and stuff like that that haven't been pressed, is probably going to be adequate. The fat-soluble vitamins I mentioned before, A, D, E, and K2 are only found in animal foods. Well, vitamin E is found in plant foods, but the others are only found in animal foods. And they're particularly high in offal, like the things like the liver, and heart and bone marrow are incredibly high in those fat-soluble vitamins. And again, you only need very small amounts of these foods to get adequate amount of those vitamins. These are like incredibly nutrient-dense foods, and that's the thing. This is the big problem that so many people face nowadays with chronic health challenges, that there's an abundance of calories and a massive deficit of nutrients. So we have all these people that are putting on all this excess body fat, but are malnourished. So in general, one of the best things you can do for your health is to reduce calories and increase your nutrients. And the best way to do that, or the only way to do that, is to eat really nutrient-dense foods. And most of those things are going to be animal foods from very carefully sourced animals that haven't been heated or processed in any way. You still, that and like dark green and leafy and brightly colored vegetables. Maddie, what's a good dose of fat? I find it easy to use a lot in cooking. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think, Maddie, as long as you're using good quality oils, it's fine. Like cooking mushrooms and eggplant stuff, they soak up so much oil. So just make sure that you're using good oils. I mentioned earlier, I don't know if you're on, but that olive oil will oxidize at like 90, 95 or 98 degrees, I think it is. So you don't want to be eating huge amounts of oxidized olive oil. But if you're using ghee or coconut oil that has a very high oxidation point, then it's fine to soak those things up. And then you can put the olive oil on your salad. There's the thing with olive oil, when it's a cold pressed organic olive oil, it's got a lot of enzymes and other things in it that will help digest your food as well. So if you have any more questions, guys, ask away. One thing I want to say is when you're shifting to eating more fat in your diet, I've gone over how to source the fats and stuff like that. If you haven't had fat for a long time, if you've been on a low-fat diet, it can be really hard to eat fat. Like you can really see it, feel just sit in your tummy. Often because your gallbladder isn't producing enough bile to break down the fat, because bile is produced by the liver and stored in the gallbladder and released in the presence of fat to emulsify those fats and help them digest. But if you haven't been eating it for a long time, if you've been on a low-fat diet, your gallbladder often won't secrete the bile when it's needed. Coconut oil is a medium-chain fat, so it doesn't require bile. It is absorbed really easily without bile. So usually if that's the case, you can start with having small amounts of coconut oil and increasing your levels. You can start having other forms of fat as well, but just have small amounts with every meal and just get used to it. Always stay below the level where you feel sick. Keish, when you say don't eat carbs and fat together, do you just mean at the same meal? So if you want carbs, just don't use much fat to cook them. Yeah, I'm just saying from the perspective of if someone's trying to lose weight, or like a lot of people have problem. They hear that fat is healthy and they've been on a low-fat diet, and a low-fat diet is a high carbohydrate diet. And then they start adding all this fat, which just increases calories, and then they put on weight. So, yeah, I would not eat them separately. I would tend to stay away from high starchy carbs most of the time, except for when you really just want to enjoy a meal. Always stick to the 80-20 rule because you want to enjoy life. But yeah, if you're trying to lose weight, yeah, you wanna avoid high fat and carbohydrate meals, because there's going to be a lot of calories in there, and it's all going to be stored as fat. Yeah, if you don't want to lose weight, then all good. As I mentioned earlier, there's still associated problems with carbohydrate and protein in excess, which is related to insulin and glycation. Yeah, I mean, health is a minefield, and if you read all the research, I mean, no one can read all the research, but the more you read, the more you start to see conflicting information. It gets very hard to know what to do all the time. So the bottom line is, eat whole foods, and listen to your body. If it's craving carbohydrate, eat carbohydrate in a form that is natural and unprocessed. If you're craving fat or you're craving protein, eat those things in a form that is natural and unprocessed. I don't think any kind of restriction is healthy, and I don't think hardcore, like, stopping yourself from using willpower to overpower the needs of your body all the time is very healthy either. When you satiate your body with all the nutrients it needs, it'll probably start to crave things less. Yeah, hope that answers your question, Keish. And Maddie, I hope that answered your question. Hey, Dean. Hey, Connie, if you guys are still on. G'day. Hey, Rob. Hey, Ratched. Yeah. Any more questions? Going once, going twice. Awesome. Well, guys, thanks for tuning in today. I'm gonna take my leave. Feel free to shoot questions in the comments, and I'll do my best to answer them this Have an awesome day, guys. Ciao.